Hey everybody, Green Films Official here. Today is an exciting day for me. You know why? Because I get to talk about a movie that I find severely underrated. The Empty Man. The Empty Man was directed by David Pryor and stars James Badge Dale. It was released on the 23rd of October in 2020 and didn't receive the best reviews initially, but has since received a cult following. It is very loosely based on the Boom Studios comic book series of the same name written by Cullen Bunn and follows a man named James Lasombra, one of the coolest protagonists I've seen in a horror movie. James is an ex-cop and grieving widower who's fairly close with his next door neighbor Nora, but the two of them are just friends. James is also friends with Nora's daughter Amanda, and Amanda is, well, let's just say Amanda is into some weird shit. One day, Amanda goes missing, and considering that the police won't do anything about it, it's up to good old James to find her, all by himself. Along the way, he finds out that the Pontifex Institute, a cult that worships a mysterious entity known as the Empty Man, is involved. From there, well, let's just say things don't get any less weird. The Empty Man is a beautifully crafted and expertly put together movie in almost every way. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous, the acting is wonderful. Seriously, James Badge Dale looks genuinely scared at numerous points in the film. It's not afraid to get into some pretty strange and out there ideas, and on top of that, it's actually pretty scary. But you wouldn't assume those things if you saw the rinky dink trailer that 20th Century Fox made for this movie.
And on the third night?
Well, on the third night, he finds you. He finds you. You can hear him, can't you? Squirming his way into your thoughts.
Hey yo, Ronald, I need that Empty Man trailer to be the most generic horror movie trailer of all time. Stat! But The Empty Man is such a unique and interesting movie. Shut the fuck. Oh my god, dude. Hey yo, I got an idea. Let's take one of the scariest scenes in the movie and just turn it into a pointless jump scare. Ooh. Despite what the trailer might make you think, this is actually a really unique and interesting movie. I can't say I've seen anything like it before. At least not in the medium of movies. The trailer would probably lead you to believe that this is like a slasher movie, and while there are slasher-esque scenes in this movie, like the death of Devorah Walsh, I would honestly say this falls more under the cosmic horror spectrum. There are even a few nods to H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. When the entity reveals its true form, it has a long whip-like head, similar to the appearance of Nyarlathotep's true form in the Cthulhu mythos. Case in point, it appears that Mr. Pryor has read some Lovecraft. I think it's also worth noting how this film utilizes fridge horror. There are a lot of scenes that are just kind of normal on a first watch that become much more creepy on a second watch. For those who aren't in the know, fridge horror is basically when a scene or a concept from any piece of media seems normal at first, but then becomes horrifying the more you think about it. Due to a twist that I'm going to explain later, James is actually only 3 days old by the end of the movie. And on top of that, a lot of the things that we thought were real were actually just in his head all along. His house wasn't even really a house, it was just an empty room all along, just for example. Anything that isn't a delusion in James's head was orchestrated by Pontifex to reveal to him the truth of his existence. This cop on the left claims to recognize James from years ago. If you watch the movie for the first time, this seems like a normal interaction. But if you watch the movie for a second time, you know this can't be true as James is only 3 days old. This brings us to the conclusion that this interaction is either a delusion in James's head or this guy is actually a Pontifex member playing along with their scheme. Creepy, right? Anyways, this is a very fun movie to analyze, and the reason for that is that this movie doesn't really hold your hand or over-explain itself. It lets the viewer figure things out on their own. I love that in a movie. The Empty Man is quite philosophical in its nature, and there are a lot of things in it that tie into real philosophies. For example, the beliefs of Pontifex are similar to that of solipsism. The idea that maybe, only your mind exists, and everything else around you is just a manifestation of what you believe exists. This is basically what Amanda explains to James in their first scene together. The key difference is that they believe that everything except their minds is fake, except for the entity. And they can create unity in a true reality, or what they believe is a true reality, so long as the entity has a host to quote-unquote transmit so they can receive. In the 20-minute prologue, we're shown Paul falling into a hole that just so happens to store the Empty Man skeleton, and thus he becomes possessed by it and becomes the new host. This is all fine and dandy for Pontifex for a little while, but then they realize that, there's only so much time that a normal human being can handle having the entity inside of them, and that they're going to need a new transmitter pretty soon. But they don't have time to just find a new one for the entity to possess, because it was supposedly 500 years between the last host and Paul. So they decide that instead of waiting for a suitable host to be born, they're going to create one, because hey, if we can just manifest anything through our minds as we are in a fake reality, then can't we just create a host? This brings us to the idea of tulpas, beings that are brought to life through thought, concentration, and time. However, it ain't just as simple as, okay, we have person now, entity, go in. They need this person to be experiencing sorrow, grief, and guilt. The reason why Paul was a suitable host was because he was going through some things. James seems to be experiencing guilt and grief of some kind, but we're not exactly shown what happened exactly. However, at the end of the film, it's revealed that his wife and kid died in a horrific car accident, and while this was happening, he was cheating on his wife with Nora on the same day as her husband's funeral. As you can probably imagine, all of that fills James up with this sorrow, grief, and guilt that the cult needs for him to be a suitable host for the entity. In a shocking twist ending, it's revealed that James is actually a tulpa that Pontifex created. They basically wrote up a fake biography and created fake memories and just tattooed them into his brain. He was conjured, not born, and is basically only 3 days old. His entire purpose to exist is basically just to have the shittiest life possible to be a suitable host for the entity. James doesn't want to be a host, so naturally he tries to fight back, but it's all for naught, and the entity fuses with him. James, presumably being controlled by the entity, kills Paul because, well, Pontifex isn't going to need him anymore, and with that, James is the new transmitter. It's a pretty dark ending, especially considering James is a really likable character who I wanted to succeed. I mean, sure, he did cheat on his wife, but aside from that, he's shown to truly believe in good and what's right, and he wants to stand up for that. On top of that, it's hard not to empathize with his situation because it feels so real. Another thing that makes James likable is that he has charisma and reacts to weird situations in a way that you would expect a normal, rational human being to.
Yeah, no.
So by the time you get to the end of the movie where almost everything that made him human is just completely gone, I don't know, it hits pretty hard. However, I believe all of this has a great role in telling this movie's message about belief in absolutely ludicrous and insane things. Pontifex is a threatening antagonistic force in this story because it feels like a real cult. As Foundflix pointed out in his Ending Explained video of this movie, the scene that takes place in the Pontifex church feels very Scientology-esque. Around the time Amanda joins Pontifex, she's going through a hard time in her life, having lost her father. And, real cults are infamous for luring in people who are vulnerable. And as I mentioned before, their beliefs are basically just an amped up version of solipsism. So from all of this evidence in the film, I think it's pretty clear that this film is making a statement on how believing in ridiculous things, is obviously very harmful. But can we find more evidence of that? I believe we can. The entity in the film is basically just a living embodiment of the beliefs of Pontifex. Or more precisely, the damage that these beliefs can have. I mean, think about it. The cult views it as the key to unity. Everyone who becomes involved with it either becomes mentally unstable or dies, and those who don't become one of its hosts, which is, basically worse than death anyway, because you lose all of your free will. It also motivates the members of Pontifex to do things that aren't so morally right, which happens in real life. Think back to the real-world Slender Man stabbings, in which those two girls viciously stabbed their friend because they believed that Slender Man wanted them to. Slender Man is an urban legend created for the internet. He isn't real, and it's ridiculous to think that he's real, yet these two girls did, and that caused them to do the horrifically immoral act that they did. This brings me to my next point about how this film discusses belief through fear. If you grew up in the 1980s, you might remember the Satanic Panic, and looking back at the Satanic Panic today, there were many, many things wrong with it. But one of the most outrageous things about it, at least to me, is that it gave power to Satanists. Sure, there would have been Satanists, but they wouldn't have been as big as a problem if it went for the Satanic Panic, because it blew the issue way out of proportion, and made people fear them, and that gave them more power that they otherwise wouldn't have had. It seriously caused more problems than solutions. James actually has a conversation with his detective buddy about how an idea or a thought can be granted power so long as people believe in it, leading to bad things. Everything said in this scene is very important for this film thematically. During what I like to think of as the urban legend arc of this film, Amanda begins spreading the idea of the entity around as if it were an urban legend to her friends. And of course they're like, "Oh, Amanda, that's silly. How could you believe that? Because why wouldn't you?" However, they sort of secretly do believe in it just out of fear that it might be true, and this is what leads into their deaths eventually. There are also other things too, such as the empty man made me do it, and the reveal that Devara was actually stabbing herself during her death scene as a way of indicating that maybe people who die to this entity do it to themselves by giving it power through belief. If it weren't for Amanda spreading the entity around as if it were an urban legend, then perhaps it wouldn't be able to do anything at all and have no power because people just view Pontifex and their beliefs as weird. It's a legitimately powerful allegory, and I'm mad that the people who made the trailer just used it to make the film look like one of those terrible urban legend slasher movies. Something you might have noticed is that I've been referring to this film's antagonist as the entity rather than the empty man throughout this video. And there's a reason for that. I want to propose an idea to you. What if the title of this movie doesn't refer to the terrifying shadow entity, but rather its hosts? After years of serving as a transmitter for the entity, Paul just is a complete shell of his former self. He experiences no emotion, hardly even reacting when he sees a gun being aimed right at him. When James becomes a host for the empty man, he loses all of his emotions and free will. Like Paul, he's now a shell of his former self. And what might you say about a desolate shell? You might say that it's empty, for lack of a better word. There's nothing inside of it. Anything that made these men once human is completely gone by the end of the movie. It's replaced by something cold and almost lifeless. And that, to me, is one of this film's most disturbing ideas. Overall, The Empty Man is a very complex film with a lot going on. But if I were to be asked what it's about thematically, I would say belief. It is a criticism of solipsism by portraying a world where it's true and showing how easy that world is to exploit. It's like, hey man, you need a host for the entity? Just make a tulpa, dude. Easy. It also is a criticism of spreading fear through belief and how damaging that can be. If you're watching this video, you might be thinking, oh, well, of course I'm not going to believe in anything silly or be a victim of senseless hysteria. But maybe that isn't so obvious to other people. I mean, those girls believed in Slender Man, and look what they did as a result of it. They stabbed their friend, most likely out of fear that Slender Man would do something to them if they didn't. Fear is an important emotion. It keeps us alive. But there's rational fear, and then there's irrational fear. And irrational fear causes things like this to spread and causes harm. We must be rational human beings and assess the legitimacy of things before we believe in them and give them power. Because the people that can be harmed by this bullshit could be so negatively affected that they become shells of their former selves. Empty, if you will. And that's what the possession of Paul and James the Sombra represents in this movie, I believe. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my analysis of this criminally underrated movie. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already and turn notifications on. Your support really helps out and I appreciate it a lot. Hey, maybe even share this video with friends. That helps too. Anyways, I gotta go now. I love all of you guys. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye!